Hello, I'm James Izimoha and you're watching A News. Let's hear top stories. European Council President pushes faster Ukraine accession talks. Zelenskyy says he's ready for a trilateral summit with Russia's Vladimir Putin. Hamas agrees to a 60-day ceasefire plan with Israel, according to mediators. European Council President Antonio Costa says Ukraine's EU membership bid must advance. Speaking after briefing EU leaders on the Washington summit, Costa called the prospect of a possible meeting between Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Vladimir Putin enormous progress. He also welcomed U.S. readiness to join security guarantees for Ukraine, calling it a very important step. Costa stressed that Europe must be part of future talks, peace talks, and confirmed the bloc is preparing a new round of sanctions against Russia.
Security guarantees.
The so-called Coalition of the Willing and the European Union had video calls on Tuesday following Monday's White House meeting. They discussed security guarantees for Ukraine and the possible summit between President Zelenskyy and President Putin. Ross Cullen has more from Paris.
Well, after those crunch talks at the White House on Monday, another flurry of diplomacy on Tuesday. To start with, a video call of the Coalition of the Willing, co-chaired by the British Prime Minister and the French President. That's a group of some 30 like-minded countries, all of them allies of Ukraine, and they were discussing supporting Ukraine with security guarantees after an eventual peace accord is signed. The discussions are, for example, would French troops deploy inside Ukraine? Would British warships patrol the Ukrainian coast? Would American air defenses come into action? It's all an attempt to ensure that Russia does not attack Ukraine again. Also on Tuesday, a meeting of the European Union at leaders level. This was a chance for the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, the French President Emmanuel Macron, and the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, among others, to update the other members of the European Union exactly what happened at the White House. They were physically present, along with Italian Prime Minister, the Finnish President was there as well. They could give the other members of the EU their readings for what is happening in terms of the dialogue between the Trump administration and the Kremlin, their readings of whether Ukraine will or won't have to give up any territory in a possible peace deal, and also their readings of a possible Zelenskyy-Putin summit. Now, this is something that Donald Trump has proposed, Volodymyr Zelenskyy has signed up to. The location is of interest. Emmanuel Macron on Tuesday suggesting that Geneva could be the place for such a bilateral summit. Switzerland is neutral. It's not a member of the EU. It's not a member of NATO. And on Tuesday, the Swiss government did say that they would guarantee Vladimir Putin's immunity if he were to come to Switzerland specifically for a peace conference. Don't forget, the Russian leader is under an international arrest warrant. Ross Cullen for A News in Paris.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says he is ready for a trilateral summit with Russia's Vladimir Putin following talks in Washington. He made the comment after meeting U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday. The talks followed Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska last Friday and months after a tense Oval Office exchange with Zelenskyy in February. Zelenskyy said he hopes the discussions could pave the way for direct talks with Putin.
To have the president.
We don't have any day. We just confirmed after this productive meeting with the president and then with all our colleagues, with the partners, we confirmed that we are ready for a trilateral meeting. And if Russia proposed to President of the United States bilateral, and then we will see the result of bilateral, and then it can be the trilateral. So I said always, so Ukraine will never stop on the way to peace, and we are ready for any kind of formats, but on the level of leaders.
Ukrainians are reacting with a mix of hope and skepticism following the meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in Washington, which aims to revive stalled peace talks.
On the streets of Kyiv, symbols of war stand as stark reminders of the devastation, even as hopes for peace cautiously grow after Monday's summit between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky.
It doesn't smell like peace yet. I think Putin will not go for it. I really wanted it all to end peacefully, but unfortunately, a lot of our people died.
Last month was the deadliest month in Ukraine since Russia's full-scale invasion began in 2022, with 286 people killed and over 1,000 injured, according to the UN. Some say that the meeting marks a step forward closer to peace.
Of course, we are filled with optimism. The meeting was already the first step, and we are waiting to see how events unfold further.
But doubts linger. For some, expectations of world leaders are limited, and the focus remains on Ukraine's own resilience.
The fact that Trump shows at every step that he has a cold attitude towards Ukraine means that there have been no expectations for a long time. There are hopes only on our armed forces, on Ukrainians, on supporting each other, and not on any illusions about world politics, any leaders.
Trump met Zelensky after holding talks with Russia's Vladimir Putin in Alaska last week. Zelensky described his White House meeting with Trump as his best so far, but stressed that peace with Moscow will require direct talks with Russia. But in the Russian capital, residents voiced caution. Some expressed hope that the negotiations could bring an end to the conflict, though only if Russia's terms were met.
It's very difficult to talk about a peaceful solution because we need it on our terms. So if all the conditions are not met, it won't be a peaceful solution.
There are two irreconcilable sides, which is why, to find peace, one of them must stop.
Some, however, place their hope in President Putin's leadership.
Putin is a very clever man, and as head of state, he will lead our country to peace. Many of our men have died. Our nation wants peace, so I think everything will be all right.
For many Russians and Ukrainians alike, the path ahead remains uncertain, but with a shared hope that negotiations may one day bring an end to the war.
Donald Trump has met European leaders after talks with Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky. Attention now shifts to a possible summit between the Russian and Ukrainian presidents, with big questions over what Kiev may have to concede. Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to this day in Europe, with an extraordinary meeting between European leaders and U.S. President Donald Trump, though the most consequential one, a face-to-face between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky, is still to come. Following the high-stakes Alaska summit with the Russian president and a private one-on-one with the Ukrainian leader at the White House on Monday, Trump convened a separate session with key European leaders to hear their concerns, though many described them less as demands and more as carefully worded appeals. Around the table, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, French President Emmanuel Macron, Finnish President Alexander Stubb, and the NATO Secretary General. Zelensky sat directly across from Trump with Mark Rutte at his side. The tone was notably more constructive than the combative Oval Office meeting in February. That's when Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance publicly rebuked Zelensky in a scene that drew widespread criticism. This time, Zelensky emerged more optimistic, posting on X that it was, quote, truly a significant step toward ending the war, and that both sides were already working on the concrete content of the security guarantees. European officials welcomed Trump's pledge to support Ukraine's long-term security, though specifics remain elusive. Trump told reporters that Europe would play a leading role, stating that they're the first line of defense and will help them out. Following the meetings, the U.S. president floated the idea of a trilateral summit involving himself, Putin, and Zelensky. But after speaking again with Putin, he appeared to reverse course, posting on social media that the Russian and Ukrainian presidents would meet first and that a trilateral meeting could offer, quote, a good chance of ending the war. The Kremlin has yet to confirm such plans, but a senior U.S. official said the Putin-Zelensky summit could be held in Hungary. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz went further, stating that the two are expected to meet within the next 2 weeks. And there may be yet another round of diplomacy on the horizon. The French president proposed a quadrilateral summit afterward, suggesting that any serious conversation about security guarantees includes, quote, the whole security of the European continent. Emmanuel Macron did not say who precisely would speak on Europe's behalf. For now, talk of a ceasefire appears to be off the table. While a full peace deal would in theory eclipse the need for a ceasefire, experts warn the real cost could be high for Ukraine. Chief among the concerns, Putin's long-standing demand to formally claim the Donetsk region. Analysts warn that if Ukraine retreats from its heavily fortified eastern belt, it could leave the country dangerously exposed. At this stage, Russia appears unable to capture the remainder of Donetsk, but with mounting international pressure for Kyiv to offer concessions, the question remains, what exactly will Ukraine be asked to give up? For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands. Back to you.
Now we're joined live by Diego Castro Silva, a political analyst from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Thank you for joining us.
Hi there.
Now, what were the outcomes of the meeting in Washington?
Well, for us to understand the meeting in Washington, I think we need to go back to the Alaska meeting. What were the objectives of Russia in Anchorage? Get out of international isolation, delay the sanctions, and disunite the West, meaning create a cleavage between US, Europe, and Ukraine. That meeting was, given those objectives, was very successful for Vladimir Putin, in the sense that the first two were clearly obtained. The third was the one that the European leaders and Ukraine tried to prevent by going to Washington and having the meeting that we had. So in that sense, the meeting in Washington was a counter response to the Anchorage summit. And in that sense, it tried to avoid the lack of unity between the US on one hand and Europe and Ukraine. And in that sense, that objective for now was achieved. Also, in part because President Putin, like in previous interactions with the US president, clearly never gave a gesture that Trump could use to further Vladimir Putin's objectives and Russia objectives, meaning it always stuck to his maximalist demands, and that, in that sense, is a slightly overplay of his hands.
Now, how important is the united presence of European leaders in Washington at this stage of the war?
Well, very much. First of all, because it avoided Zelenskyy, President Zelenskyy, being isolated and kind of being forced to say no to Trump alone. And that was very important. By being there, and in that sense that how the delegation was also chosen was very interesting, meaning you had the three most important countries in Europe in terms of GDP and even militarily, which are Germany, France, and UK. But you also had two presidents with a lot of access and a very good relationship with President Trump, Prime Minister Meloni of Italy, and President Stubb of Finland.
Finally, do you see these talks as a step toward an eventual peace framework, or merely as a show of political solidarity?
Well, for now is a show of political solidarity, because I feel a lot of things important for your question, meaning the peace framework, are a lot in the air, and it's very unclear how things will proceed. One of the reasons is very unclear is because US policy is very unclear as well. So it makes the field very open to different possibilities. I don't think at this stage we can say we are at halftime, more in the end of the game, or at, like Winston Churchill would say, at the end of the beginning. What I would say is that I think we are somewhat closer to understanding the limits of the positions of the different parties than we were before. And that you might call an advance.
Well, thank you very much for your time and insight.
Thank you.
Hamas has agreed to a 60-day ceasefire plan with Israel, according to Egyptian officials. The deal includes the release of about half the hostages in Gaza in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. The proposal, backed by Egypt and Qatar, mirrors a framework earlier outlined by U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Hamas confirmed its approval, while Israeli media reported the government had received the response. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has previously said Israel would only accept a deal if all hostages are freed at once. Palestinian families in Gaza say they cannot endure another displacement as Israeli threats to re-enter Gaza City mount. Humanitarian groups warn of a looming catastrophe if more than 1 million people are forced to move south.
Palestinians in Gaza City are bracing for another mass displacement, with Israeli forces signalling plans to reassert control over the north. More than 2 million people are already crowded into a fraction of the strip, leaving little space and few resources for survival.
I have been displaced from Beit Lahia 5 times, to Khan Yunis al-Maghazi camp in the central Gaza Strip, then to Rafah. Then I returned to the town of al-Zawaidah, and then we came back here. Now I will not be displaced even if it costs me my life. I will not be displaced because the financial means do not allow it. There is no work, no money, and no tents. Where do we go? There is no safe place.
For many, the journey has already been repeated too many times. Some have moved across the strip dozens of times or more, each time searching in vain for safety.
We live in tents. We have been displaced more than 10 times. We went to Khan Yunis, Rafah, al-Zawaidah, Nusayrat, and everywhere. And now, if we are forced to be displaced, we do not have the fare for the car that will transport us.
The fear of being uprooted again is compounded by financial and medical pressures. Families say the cost of another move is impossible to bear.
I cannot be displaced again, especially since I have a daughter who has cancer and is also disabled. I do not have the money to be displaced, and my family consists of 7 people. We do not have the financial, psychological, or moral means. Even a safe place is not available. There is death here and death there, and it makes no difference. I am not ready, and everyone must hear this.
Even those who consider moving say there is no guarantee of protection.
There is no safe place in Gaza. They are bombing tents, schools, hospitals, and homes. There is no safe place. But we have no choice. People want to save their lives by going to any area, clinging to the hope that this or that area is safe. But the truth is, there is no safe place.
Aid groups warn that a new forced displacement could collapse Gaza's health system and deepen the humanitarian crisis, leaving already desperate families with no refuge and no way forward.
Public frustration in Israel is mounting as citizens press leaders for a political solution instead of a prolonged war in Gaza. Mediators Egypt and Qatar, backed by the US, have already put forward a ceasefire plan that Hamas says it has accepted. However, the Israeli government remains silent.
A major highway in Tel Aviv was blocked by Israeli protesters on Tuesday. They're demanding an agreement to end the war in Gaza and secure the return of hostages. The demonstration followed mass nationwide rallies at the weekend when tens of thousands took to the streets in one of the largest protests since the conflict began. Families of hostages joined the crowds, pressing the government to strike a deal with Hamas to free those still held in Gaza.
We started in Sunday stopping Israel in order to bring our hostages back. We find that the only thing that works is putting pressure on the Israeli government to make a deal, to seal the deal and bring all of our hostages back and stop the war in Gaza. We will not stop until all our hostages are home.
Israeli officials say around 50 hostages remain captive since the 7th of October attacks, but only 20 are believed to be alive. The protests come as Hamas announced it has accepted a ceasefire proposal mediated by Egypt and Qatar with US backing. The 60-day truce plan includes the release of half the hostages in exchange for Israel freeing a number of Palestinian prisoners. Senior Hamas official Bassem Naim confirmed the group's approval, while other Palestinian factions also informed mediators they support the deal. So far, Israel has not officially responded to the proposal, though officials confirmed it was received.
Spain is facing its worst wildfire season in decades as blazes continue to devastate the northern region, forcing mass evacuations of people from their homes, leaving thousands displaced. Firefighters are struggling to contain the flames due to extreme heat and strong winds.
Wildfires continue to tear through northern Spain in what officials say is the country's worst fire season in more than 3 decades. In Galicia's Orense province, firefighters, including Spain's military emergency units, battled massive blazes overnight in the towns of Buses, Oimbra and Gondolfes, as thick smoke spread across forested hills. So far this year, fires have destroyed an area of land as large as 300,000 hectares, the highest on record and more than 4 times the average of recent decades. Fires remain active at 23 locations across Spain and at Extremadura. At least 4 people have died. More than 31,000 residents have evacuated from areas, and thousands remain displaced. Authorities have opened 92 investigations and have detained 31 suspects. Authorities are pledging support for affected communities, but with temperatures rising to 44 degrees and strong winds fueling the flames, officials warn containment could still take several more days.
The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has provided $150 million to support green energy and reconstruction in Turkey's earthquake-hit southeast. Our correspondent Ali Aziz brings us the details.
The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is stepping up its support for Turkey's recovery and green transition. The EBRD confirmed a $150 million loan to Energisa Energy for projects in the Taurus region, an area devastated by the February 2023 earthquakes that killed more than 50,000 people and destroyed critical infrastructure. The financing will help rebuild the electricity network while also funding the construction of new solar power plants. These investments are part of Turkey's broader green energy agenda, which aims to reduce carbon emissions, prevent energy losses, and expand renewable power generation. Turkey has increased renewable capacity, aiming for 65% of electricity from renewables by 2035. Solar and wind projects are key, with plans for at least 3 gigawatts of new solar a year. The Energisa project supports this effort by providing sustainable power to businesses and boosting resilience in a heavily affected region. This loan is part of the EBRD's €1.5 billion earthquake response package announced shortly after the disaster. Beyond infrastructure, the package also supports small businesses, credit lines for individuals, and partnerships to drive private sector recovery. EBRD's Vice President Matteo Patron said the rebuilding effort requires long-term commitment and trusted partnerships, calling reliable, sustainable power fundamental to human well-being and economic recovery. For Enerjisa, the loan reflects investor confidence in Turkey's energy transition. Its CFO, Philip Olbrich, said the partnership with the EBRD strengthens the company's strategy for sustainable growth, even in a challenging environment. Since 2009, the EBRD has invested more than 22 billion euros in Turkey, making it one of the bank's largest portfolios worldwide. For A News, this is Aliya Aziz, Istanbul, Turkey.
Armenia and Iran signed a series of cooperation agreements on Tuesday during Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian's official visit to Yerevan. After the talks, a joint statement was issued and memorandums were signed in areas including energy, transport, and political consultations between the countries for the next 2 years. Pezeshkian said discussions focused on strengthening ties and advancing regional projects, including the North-South Transport Corridor and the East-West Trade Route. He emphasized that all transport communications through Armenia will remain under Armenian sovereignty, with security guaranteed by Armenian authorities. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said that the visit by Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian to Armenia has provided the opportunity for Tehran to reiterate its geopolitical concerns about the developments in the South Caucasus. Turashil Alilu has more.
Foreign Minister Araghchi said that Tehran is taking the recent visit by President Pezeshkian to Yerevan as an opportunity to raise its concerns about any change in the geopolitical map of the South Caucasus. In an exclusive interview with the official IRNA news agency, it described Iran's geopolitical concerns as alteration of internationally recognized borders and undermining the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the regional states, saying that it appears Iran's concerns have been addressed in the peace deal reached between Azerbaijan and Armenia on 8th of August in Washington and in their agreement on Zangezur corridor. Araghchi said Tehran is closely monitoring the developments in the region. Also, Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghai said in a weekly press conference that Iran supports the peace deal as a foundation for a lasting security and stability in South Caucasus. According to the spokesman, while launching the transit route from mainland Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan via Armenia is of particular importance, no foreign military force shall be deployed along Iran's common border in the region in the wake of the implementing it. The visit by Iran's President Pezeshkian to Armenia has gained additional significance following signing of the peace deal between Baku and Yerevan, including the agreement on construction of the Zangezur transit route. Iran has welcomed peaceful settlement of disputes in the Caucasus, but says it has serious concerns that its land access to Europe via Armenian and Russian territories may be cut off in the wake of launching of the corridor. Political circles in Tehran also view the Zangezur transit route as a winning card for the neighboring Turkey to establish a free land access to the Central Asia, which Iran regards as its cultural and civilizational backyard. Turash Shiralilu, reporting for A News TV, Tehran.
Ukraine is in active negotiations with Azerbaijan for new natural gas supplies, according to officials. Talks also cover allowing non-residents to store gas in Ukraine's underground facilities and launching joint extraction projects under the Ukrainian-American Reconstruction Fund. A new contract could be signed before the heating season, according to authorities. In late July, Naftogaz signed its first agreement with Soko Energy Ukraine, with the test delivery of Azerbaijani gas now moving through the Trans-Balkan corridor. Naftogaz says the step is strategically vital for building long-term cooperation. The Atom Agency hosted a Kazakh delegation in Tashkent on Monday to advance cooperation in the nuclear sector. The sides discussed seismic safety of nuclear plant sites, joint monitoring of radiation and environmental conditions, and mechanisms for emergency response. Uzbekistan highlighted progress on international nuclear safety commitments, while both countries stressed the potential of nuclear technologies in energy, medicine, agriculture, and water treatment. The talks reaffirmed bilateral commitment to safe and sustainable nuclear development in Central Asia. Uzbekistan and the European Union are entering a new phase of cooperation. President Shavkat Mirziyoyev has announced that a key agreement is set to be signed soon, expanding economic and political ties. Our correspondent Faiza Kalimoziner has more.
Uzbekistan is preparing to sign a major new agreement with the European Union aimed at taking their partnership to a higher level. President Shavkat Mirziyoyev announced this during an international forum in Tashkent. He said the agreement is expected to be signed within the next few months, marking a significant step forward in relations between Uzbekistan and the EU. So, what does this mean on the ground? The new deal will replace the old agreement from 1999 and will greatly expand opportunities for trade and investment. It will simplify customs procedures, speed up the movement of goods, and introduce stronger protections for intellectual property. This is expected to attract more foreign investment and boost Uzbekistan's economy. The agreement has been in the works for several years. Its text was finalized in July 2022, followed by legal reviews and translations into EU languages. In last November, President Mirziyoyev and European Council President Charles Michel discussed speeding up the signing. Also, earlier, the EU ambassador to Uzbekistan, Toivo Klar, said the agreement will not only strengthen economic and trade ties, but also deepen political relations. Speaking at the forum, President Mirziyoyev also highlighted the strategic role of Azerbaijan as a transport and energy bridge between Central Asia and Europe. He expressed gratitude to Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev for his active involvement in regional initiatives. Key projects include developing logistics and energy corridors, many passing through Azerbaijan. And according to Mirziyoyev, these initiatives will help restore Central Asia's status as a major trade and economic hub between Asia and Europe. This growing connectivity with neighboring countries complements Uzbekistan's expanding partnership with the European Union. Just to put this into perspective, the EU is one of Central Asia's biggest partners. It accounts for around a quarter of the region's trade, and over the last decade, the EU has provided nearly half of all foreign investment in Central Asia. From Almaty, Kazakhstan, Fariza Kalimurzina, A News.
Syria's food security is under its greatest strain in decades after the worst drought in 36 years slashed wheat production by around 40%, squeezing the country's cash-strapped government. The failure of securing large-scale purchases threatens millions who depend on subsidized bread.
Syria is facing a potential food crisis after the worst drought in more than 3 decades, which has devastated wheat production. That's according to the United Nations, which says that this year's drought has cut national wheat output by about 40%. The UN is warning that around 3 million Syrians could soon face severe hunger. More than half of the population of 25 million is already food insecure. In the country's northeast, often called Syria's breadbasket, farmers like Abbas Othman from Kamishli have been left with no crop to collect.
This year we planted 6 hectares and we harvested nothing. The crops didn't grow, and even the shepherds didn't benefit from the land. We incurred huge losses, including farm wages, seeds and fertilizer. We lost all of these costs.
The shortage is a major challenge for Syria, which is trying to rebuild after the 14-year civil war. Wheat is Syria's most important crop, central to its subsidised bread programme, but the government has been slow to organise large-scale imports, according to experts. Officials say only around 373,000 tonnes have been bought from local farmers this season, half of last year's volume. The government still needs to import about 2.5 million tonnes.
Local production does not cover more than 2 to 3% of local demand, especially after a year of drought that hit Syria. Never in Syria's history has there been a year like this one, and therefore it can't be relied upon, especially since the main food in Syria is bread.
In May, President Donald Trump announced the lifting of US sanctions on Syria in an effort to support recovery. Yet despite this, Damascus faces delays in payments. Russia, once Syria's main supplier, has largely suspended deliveries since December, citing financial problems and uncertainty about the new government. Aid workers and traders warn that without urgent action and international support, Syria could see its worst food crisis in decades.
According to the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister for Economic Affairs, Afghanistan has now achieved 60% self-sufficiency in meeting the country's floor needs domestically. Officials say this marks a significant milestone for the nation's economy. Correspondent Tamim Bahiz has more from Kabul.
As Afghanistan celebrates its 106th anniversary of independence from the British Empire, sustainability turns into one of the key priorities for the government. New figures show the country is producing more of its own food than ever before. Latest data suggest that domestic production of flour reached 3.5 million tons and are now being produced inside the country, while the demand amounts to around 6 million tons of flour each year. Officials say some 200 flour factories are active nationwide. Together, they produce about 1 million tons of flour annually, with the remainder coming from smaller local mills. The Deputy Prime Minister's office say these factories have attracted nearly $150 million in investment. Beyond boosting domestic production, the industry has also provided jobs. More than 2,500 Afghans are now in permanent employment at the flour factories across the country. Authorities say increasing self-sufficiency in key goods like flour reduces reliance on imports and strengthens food security, a priority as the country marks more than a century of independence. Officials add that continued investment in agriculture and food processing will be critical if Afghanistan is to further increase production and ensure long-term stability. This is Tamim Bahis in Kabul for A News.
Well, that's all we have for now. From all of us in the studio, thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.